Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm Douglas Johnson, yoga teacher, meditation teacher, non-dual teacher, certified Kiloby inquiry facilitator. And here today to talk a little bit about shadow and what that means and ways that you can begin to integrate this into your spiritual life and practice. Before I do that, however, I do want to thank all of my patrons on Patreon who help support me financially by making a monthly contribution. And if you'd like to join that community, please check out the links in the description below. You can join for as little as $1 a month, and I do post extra content there like writings, event notifications and things like that that I can't really post on YouTube. So I also do want to thank those of you on YouTube who like, subscribe, and comment, as that helps spread the word of the teaching and help it go further. YouTube is operated by algorithms, and the algorithms, depending on the interaction on the YouTube page and with the videos, that tends to determine how far they go. So I know many of my students like to kind of keep a low-key profile, but one way you can contribute, one way that you can help is actually by getting out of that shell and going ahead and sharing, even just saying hello, or saying you enjoyed something or you got something from it. That is very helpful on YouTube. Okay, so shadow. Shadow is something that the term was first used by psychologist Carl Jung. I'm not sure if the way I'm going to use it today is exactly his conception of it. Like many things, sometimes the people who first identify or come up with an idea or give it a name, that doesn't mean that that's the final word on that concept, even though that person may have sort of had the original idea. That concept may go on to evolve in other people's minds and people's practices. So shadow is a term that many of my teachers, spiritual teachers, will use. And basically, shadow is repressed parts of the self, aspects that are too painful for us to bring into our conscious awareness. And so they are repressed. Then what tends to happen is we will see these qualities in others, and we tend to do one of two things. And this is really where you want to pay attention. We tend to either idolize or idealize that quality. That is called shadow hugging. So that is when, for instance, your guru, your teacher, is seen as perfect, saintly, without flaw, so wise, so intelligent, so spiritual, so connected with the ground of their being. And usually, again, this is in contrast, right? So we are not all of those things, right? So this is called shadow hugging, and this is one way that shadow shows up. Another way that shadow shows up is what we call shadow boxing. So great place to look for shadow boxing is with politicians, world leaders, people with a lot of power and influence. It's not for everybody, but a lot of people will have strong feelings about Trump or Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell. That's in the United States. Internationally, Vladimir Putin might be a figure that gets a lot of people really upset. Zelensky, sort of his opponent. Again, we can maybe see where we start to project these aspects of ourself that we've repressed. So projection is another term that is worth noting here. So again, with shadow, we repress these aspects of ourselves. And projection is where we see them in others. So again, this is where the shadow boxing and shadow hugging comes in. So again, we get really upset. And it could be, really inequality. Someone who's very forward, aggressive. Again, when I use that term aggressive, it isn't meant as a term having value or lacking value. A lot of people will use it in that way. Oh, they're so aggressive, like it's a negative quality. Well, sometimes we need aggression. Sometimes we're glad that an aggressive person is our friend or our partner, right? If we're maybe waiting in line or something and, we need someone to step in and really take charge in order for us to get a seat or get in the door or whatever it might be, we might be grateful that we were with someone who's more aggressive. So I want to be very clear about this. Spiritually speaking, human traits generally are not seen as negative or positive inherently. If we have these ideas, they tend to come from the culture that we're raised in. Okay, so I really hope everyone can understand that. So in our culture right now, it's very fashionable and trendy for women to be very sort of outspoken and aggressive. This is seen as empowered womanhood, right? The goddess energy. In our culture right now in the United States, that's generally celebrated. And people will praise that person who stands up, a female who stands up and sort of speaks her mind and speaks her truth and, is aggressive in getting, the promotion or whatever it is. It's like, you go, girl, right? So this is just where we are right now. This is celebrated. But a few hundred years ago, this would not have been seen as a feminine trait or a attractive or desirable feminine trait. In fact, mothers and fathers might have been telling their daughters, like, look, tone it down. You're never going to get married. You're going to be ostracized in society if you are this aggressive and this forward, whatever it might be. But throughout history, there have been men and women who have been more or less assertive or aggressive. Okay? It's just a human trait. It's not inherently masculine or feminine. Okay? We might see aggressiveness or forwardness as a more masculine trait. But I think anyone would have to admit that they've met women who were more aggressive than certain men that they've met, right? So certain men might be very withdrawn and very passive. Right? Leave it in the comments below if you've never met a man like that. I think everyone has met a man like that. And then everyone has met a woman who is very aggressive, very assertive, right? And so if we pair those two up, and actually oftentimes you'll find couples like this, where it's a sort of yin-yang complementary, at least in certain aspects of the relationship. The woman might actually be the more masculine of the two. She might wear the pants, so to speak, okay? So my point is that human traits from a spiritual perspective, from a completely enlightened perspective, are not inherently good or bad. So if you are aggressive, let's say, maybe your parents have been telling you since you were young that you should be less aggressive. Maybe they've told you it's even wrong for you to be aggressive, or it's bad for you to be aggressive, or it's evil for you to be aggressive. They might have told you this because it was threatening to them. It made them uncomfortable. That's one explanation. Another explanation is that they didn't think it was a desirable trait in society. So they tried to teach you the right way to fit in, the right way to get acceptance and to be appreciated as a member of society. Now that's fine. I don't want to get into whether or not that is a good parenting approach or parenting style. But I do want to get to the point that this has nothing to do with absolute truth. There have been societies, again, throughout history where aggressiveness might have been celebrated, even necessary for survival. Okay, this is just the way it is. And then there may have been periods of time and cultures where aggressiveness is seen as very bad, maybe unspiritual, unenlightened. But the truth is, it's neither spiritual nor not spiritual, desirable or undesirable in a ultimate sense. Okay? Even that term, when we say aggressiveness, this is very much like the terms yin and yang. Some of you have heard me speak before about yin and yang being relative terms. They're not absolute. And so something that is yin in one context can be yang in another context. Same way here. Someone who is aggressive in one setting might be seen as the passive one in another setting. Maybe you've seen that even. Maybe you have a brother or sister who seemed very aggressive, very forward, and then you meet someone else at school or they make a new friend who leaves them in the dust in terms of their aggressiveness, right? Same with passivity. Maybe you consider yourself shy and passive, but then you meet someone who stutters and can barely even speak when meeting strangers or in unusual situations. And you realize, relative to them, I am not that shy or withdrawn. So again, these qualities, so-and-so is withdrawn, so-and-so is aggressive, so-and-so is whatever it might be, pretty, stupid, handsome, dumb. These are all relative things. These are traits and they're relative. And from an enlightened point of view, they are not inherently good or bad. That does not mean that your culture, your society, or situations will not celebrate or require certain traits. So if you lack aggressiveness, then you might find that there will be certain jobs, certain roles, and certain situations where you will be left behind, or you will not be able to get as much from that situation as you could, or whatever it might be. At the same token, if you are very aggressive, there might be situations where you are rejected for that quality, where that's not a desirable quality, where that is not celebrated or welcome. So again, even though from an enlightened perspective, there is no ultimate good or bad trait, you might say, these traits in life, in time, in society, in relationship, these traits might be more or less desirable or fitting given a certain situation, okay? So hopefully that's very clear. So what can happen to us as we're coming up as little children, even as babies, sometimes you see this, people will start to display their traits. It just is basically part of who they are. Some children, some babies will very quickly, it'll be known, it'll be apparent to their parents that they're very aggressive, very forward, maybe even very angry. And you know, that's how they handle situations. Other children might very quickly display qualities of being more passive, being malleable, you know, whatever it might be. So again, even though the parents may celebrate and appreciate certain qualities in their children and not other qualities in their children, from an enlightened point of view, one is not inherently good or bad, okay? Again, if you have a very aggressive child, assertive child, and you think, gosh, you know, I wish they would just listen to me. I wish they would just do what they were told. I wish they would just not march to their own drummer, maybe in 30 or 40 years, we find ourselves at war and your child is actually the leader of, a military force that saves the world. I don't know, I'm just coming up with situations off the top of my head, so forgive me if that's not the best example. But there are other traits too. So for instance, you might have a child who's very creative, who's, again, sort of more empathic. They're not forceful. They are very creative, though. They have lots of creative ideas. They think differently than most people, but their math and spelling scores might be horrible at school. And so again, you as a parent, you might think, well, what good is all this creativity? They need to be able to do math and spell. They need good grades so they can go to college. And when they go to college, they need good grades so they can get a good job. Well, we might think this way, but in reality, if you look, there isn't really a correlation between good grades in school and actually, your potential earning income and your success and happiness in life. So my understanding is these things can be more highly correlated with something that's called emotional intelligence, which really has nothing to do with SATs, grades in school, or anything like that. So again, parents innocently, again, not because they're evil or they have malice, but innocently, they might think certain traits are desirable. They might encourage certain traits in their children, discourage others. Well, if this is aggressive enough, and sometimes even if it's not that aggressive, what we can find is that children start repressing traits within themselves. So they realize that their aggression isn't welcome. And so unconsciously, they create a what we can call conditioning, a program that says, I won't get love if I'm aggressive, and I want my parents' love. So I'm going to push down my aggressive traits or qualities so that I can get my parents' approval and love. Now again, many parents might be like, good, it's exactly what I want. It's exactly what I'm trying to do. But again, if we step back from our own cultural and personal perspective, and this is what's meant by enlightened. This is what spirituality is really about. Okay, it's not about anything other than that. If we step back from that, again, what we'll find is generally there are places for aggressive people. There are places for creative people. There are places for passive people. So it's not that any of these traits are inherently good or bad. I think in an enlightened society, I suspect that most children would be encouraged to develop their traits, whatever they might be. Now, they might be encouraged to do that in a way that isn't destructive to themselves and others, because maybe some traits can be that way if we're not careful. But I think most traits, whether it's, aggression or creativity or passivity, most traits can be encouraged in a constructive way, in a way that is going to benefit the child or the individual and the society at large. I think this is what an enlightened society would do. So we have to realize that when we do this to our children, we very often cause them to repress aspects of their self, their individual human personality. This is not to be confused with the big self, the true self, the enlightened self. But as human beings, we are meant to embody both. So most human beings are embodying their small self only. And their small self, most human beings, has a lot of damage, so to speak, from this kind of conditioning, the social conditioning that they went through as they grew up. They have a lot of parts of that small self that are repressed, that are not seen, that are not known. So traditionally, we wake up to our true nature, and then we see the big self. Now, until recently, in many spiritual circles, and still to this day in many spiritual circles, the small self is oftentimes at that point ignored. It's sort of pushed off to the side, and basically we're told that it's not important, that it's this big self that is the important part. But that never really sounded right to me, and that's not really part of the Zen tradition or teaching, not when it's understood fully. And this is one of the things I really like about studying with my current teacher, Scott Killaby, is he is very much encourages people to embody the human fully. And so this requires us to know the human fully. And we can't know the human fully if we're in repression, if we're pushing down aspects of the self. So again, this is where seeing shadow and re-owning shadow can be really, really important. So I think that that's long enough for this talk. I think what I'll do is I'll do another talk about how to do that, ways that you can do that, and also talk about other aspects of shadow. So if you haven't already, if you like and subscribe and maybe comment on YouTube, again, that's a huge help. And again, my patrons on Patreon, they are really the ones that make these talks possible for me to do. So I want to thank them. And if you're watching these free on YouTube, you might want to thank them as well. Okay, everyone, until next time, namaste and have a great day.